local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming.
Good afternoon, councillors, staff and to visitors. Welcome to our council meeting. Thanks for being here. Just a reminder with mobile phones, if you could switch them off, we'd appreciate it, as it does interfere with our recording. And happy birthday to Councillor Walker today. Thank you. Please be seated. I have two apologies, Councillor Stojanczyk and Councillor Daking. Apologies for today. Declaration of interest. Any declaration of interest? No. Confirmation of minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes held on the 4th of November. Move Deputy Mayor. Second, Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. No deputations, no petitions. A community report. We have Mr David Wilkes, Senior Program Worker for Wellways. David, are you there? Yep.
Thank you very much. I grew up with mental illness in my family. My father had schizophrenia. We got no help as a family. It really impacted the family. I work for Wellways. We help people with a mental illness recover. And the little cards I handed out to you, 3/4 of people with mental illness say they experience stigma and discrimination. And so our job is helping people participate in the community. So we had a community dog walk down at Royal Park. And about 60 people, everyone we work with is isolated, came to that and we walked around and enjoyed that. So I would encourage you to, we've got a campaign, an anti-stigma campaign. If you go to the website, you can find more about that. And I'm conscious of the fact that being mayor is a very stressful job. And so I have a gift for the mayor. This is the mascot that our anti-stigma campaign. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, David. Public question time. Any questions from the public?
Robin Smith on behalf of Coffee Republic.
Thanks, Robin.
Cafe in Lisbon Street Mall. Previously, I've asked about vehicle numbers on the City Heart A3 road, those traffic, local traffic versus through traffic numbers. Now I'm looking at the Patterson Street and Charles Street one-way street conversion to two-way. What is the demand for that particular route cutting through the CBD? Has that been quantified, please? Where are you technically going from the town hall to Jimmy's supermarket? It seems a lot of change in roading just for one short trip.
Thank you. That's a proposed, it's not definite yet. So did you want to comment, General Manager Shane?
It has been quantified, but I don't have that on the top of my head.
Take it on notice.
But also, the Patterson Street sections to facilitate the bus interchange. Buses need to be able to get in and out in both directions. So the primary purpose of that is to facilitate a bus interchange.
Thank you. So just to be clear, the primary purpose of the Patterson Street is for the bus. Would that extend most likely for the Charles Street section as well? Because I'm assuming that those buses that would be heading to South Launceston, Trevellyn, etc., would be going down Charles Street.
Yes, most likely.
Okay, thank you. Second question, please, Mr. Mayor. There are changes proposed to the network through City Heart, the CBD. It is, again, the A3 road, and the intention is to take off the traffic from essentially the Midland Highway and to run it up Cimetière Street and out through Dowling Street. Together with the changes that I've asked about, which are the one-way street conversions, and then some one-way streets to be, I beg your pardon, some two-way streets then to be turned into one-way to support that Kingsway. Would it be possible to separate those two pieces of infrastructure work so that potentially the A3 diversions are done first and settled in, and from that then the discovery could be made whether it's still necessary to make those changes to the network, notwithstanding the bus depot?
Thank you. I'm not an engineer, but I'm not sure whether it can be. We'll take it on notice otherwise. Look,
it is internal. It's most certainly we need to do the works to facilitate the movement around the city first before any works in the city. I'm not. I guess that's a decision of council when we get to it down the track around the commitment to two-way streets. But certainly the works in Cimetière Street would have to come first regardless.
That they would before those changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. The public questions I noticed were there too that I forgot to mention from the last meeting. So we go on to 9.1. Under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in agenda item 9, Planning Authority. So we have 9.1. We do have a speaker. We have, is that Kinkada? Kashri? Kinkada?
Good afternoon, members.
Sorry about that. I didn't pronounce your name right.
It doesn't matter, yeah. People call me Ravi, which is not mentioned there. My first name is different and the middle name is Ravi. That's what they call me. So
anyway, welcome.
Yeah, it's all good. So, this is my first time addressing so many beautiful people here. Forgive me if I speak something wrong. So I have put in an application for a service station in West Launceston to operate outside the operating hours for a terminal, overnight payment terminal. So I took over the business in 2020, and the terminal has been there before I took over the business. And the landlord said it's been there, so it wouldn't be any problem running that. So I've been running that, and it actually brought to the council notice, I think, few months ago. And then that's when I made aware of putting an application, and I've been trying to get an approval for it. And there was some representation against the application. So I'm here to address those representation where the neighbors claiming there's been very huge noise from the pumps, and there's so many burnouts over the night, and there's so many customers coming in to fill up using the overnight payment terminal. And I have a system where I can see how many customers come in during those hours. And I did pull out all the information and send that to the town planner who's taken over my case. And there's hardly 3 or 4 customers coming in that time. And there's no burnouts, because since I've put in the application, I've been keeping an eye on my surveillance system, and there is nothing. And this is all false representations that's been put in. And yeah, if I had to close that, that'll actually affect my business as well, because I brought up that business from nowhere to so high. It's been shut down for so many years. It had very bad reputation, and now a lot of people from Launceston come to us to save some money, and that's what I've been doing, and I want to keep doing that without now ruining the reputation of the business.
Good.
So
thank you very much. No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
There's no other speakers that I have on item 9.1. Somebody have to move. Councillor McKenzie, seconded Councillor Spencer. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Mayor, and I thank the proponent for coming and speaking to us today. Again, this is about opening hours and perceived noise. I think are the two issues that we have discretion to deal with today. And I think the original opening hours were approved from 7 till 7. And the proposed opening hours are between 5 and 10, where they'll be managed as opening hours, and the rest of the time they'll be operating on a sort of remote system where you come into the service station, you pay for your petrol and you move on out of hours. What I think any service station, any commercial business that exists in and around residential properties are a potential for conflict in one way or another, and particularly in the sense of noise. The fact that, as we saw today, there are residents all round the service station, and I think we got representation from 2, possibly 3, we must have had 3, representations today. I would have thought if there was an enormous amount of angst about it, there would have been a significant number of other representations in regards to the noise. I live in Launceston and I can hear noise from Brisbane Street, and I live about a kilometre up the road. So the reality is, wherever you live, there will be some noise that comes from traffic. Some noise will come from loud muffler systems, some from people screeching their tyres around corners. I think the evidence when we drove to the service station today, there's no evidence of burnouts on the tarmac in relation to the actual service station today. So I think if there were burnouts going on, we'd see rubber all over the concourse there, which wasn't evident today. I think the other important thing to note is that this has been operating outside of permit conditions for some time, and I think there seems to be only about 1 or 2 noise occasions that have been reported to the police, as we understand. So as a consequence of that, in the consequence of a neighbourhood, I think it's not huge. And I guess if you buy a house next to some form of activity which is commercial, you would expect a level of noise to occur which would not be like your next door neighbour in a house. So I think you need to be mindful of that when you buy a house in an area like that. The service station hasn't just popped up and appeared. It's been there for many, many, many years. So from my perspective, it's added value to the area, and clearly a lot of people use that place for service station needs. As we see around Launceston and probably lots of places around Australia, more service stations are closing down rather than opening up. So the ability for a service station to make money on low margins requires turnover. Now, we take a bit of turnover away by shutting down some of those hours that they're operating or preventing them from having 24/7 service, is chipping away at that margin and the ability for a business to survive in there. My sense is that the business is there, and you need to look at a certain level of interruption if you live in that area that's caused by having a business in the area. And I believe, given that the operation has been outside of permit, not nice to have to be dealing with something which wasn't operating under permit conditions, but I appreciate the comments made by the proponent that they thought they were because they didn't know anything different because that's the way it was operating when he took it over. Now, I guess everybody needs to do their due diligence and all those things. So having said that, I am immensely pleased that this person's actually set up a business or kept the business going, something that wasn't working well, and providing an opportunity for the people of West Launceston and maybe other places to actually buy their petrol in situ before they go off and do some other things in and around the city. I think that the concessions that we're being asked to give today are quite reasonable, and therefore we'll be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. There's only a couple of things I want to mention about the noise. Yeah, I don't think that's a problem. Like Councillor McKenzie said, there's no burnout marks on the roads. I often go there. They give great service. This gentleman has got this survey going really well. It's getting supported because he has cheaper fuel than most other surveys. I'll keep going there and support him. Before he took this over, this survey was broken. It was virtually going to be bulldozed. So, and also 2 other surveys in the areas in the last 10 years are gone. So we definitely need another survey there. So I'll be supporting this for that reason. And to open 24/7, people working on shift work, there's probably 5-8 Ks for another survey. So I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. I think Councillor McKenzie and Councillor Spencer have captured the key threads, particularly of this one for mine. Like I often say, I usually start, when there's representations, I usually start with the issues that people have raised. And I guess, Mr Mayor, it's got to be said, I'm pretty disappointed with the tone of some of these representations that are made. Someone's called the police about general loitering. I didn't know that was actually an offence, general loitering. I'm not really sure what the thrust of the concern is. People revving their car when they fill it up. I mean, you know, as our officers have stated very clearly, for many of these issues, they're not actually relating to council, things that council can control. And the thing that I'm probably, I guess, confused about, if you will, Mr Mayor, if this is such an issue, I'm not sure about other councillors. They might have been contacted. I've not had any contact about this. I've not had any emails about this. I've not had any phone calls. The only commentary I've had about this service station has been positive, about the affordability of what it provides, which again isn't a planning matter. But often if there are things that are concerning, people are very, very quick, as they should be, to let councillors know, and I certainly haven't been informed of this. The other one that I also found somewhat bemusing was that if you read the representations, it sounds like, you know, it's, I don't know, it's Compton and the Bronx mixed together up in West Launceston. And again, I had a matter that I needed to bring to the attention of police regarding something in another area of the city, and they were talking about speeding in West Launceston, and this area wasn't mentioned at all. So I'm a little confused. But like the previous speakers, I'll be supporting this. I do understand that, you know, again, it's that conflict, conflict, isn't it, where people will say we need something in our area, we need to support business, and the minute someone wants to open something or extend the hours, yeah, well, that's good as long as it's not where I live. So I'll be supporting it, and I would urge anyone, if they do see hooning or inappropriate speeding or inappropriate motorist behaviour in the area, to report it to Tasmania Police, as our officers have highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Look, I'll be supporting this. I can remember when Ravi went in, this is almost a little bit of a character reference, I guess, for him. I remember when he started there, and it was under a BP flag at the time, and it was a rundown, as Councillor Spencer said, very ordinary, not a good place at all. It had been shut up for a while. Ravi went in there, changed everything over, and he put the cameras in place from memory because somebody one night stole his air pump on the end of his pumping up tyre thing. So he was quite upset, spent some money, and that was the start of it. And from there on in, he has changed that place immensely. They have worked diligently, they've put food in there. They talk about speeding. One of the complaints was speeding down Cambridge Street. Now, I've lived in that area for many years. It's a long stretch of road. It goes for a kilometre or so. You don't reckon anyone might on a downhill run just occasionally speed? I don't think it's because Ravi opened the service station. I really don't think that was the reason. So, look, he deserves to keep this going. He's worked extremely hard. I remember the first time he went there when he had very cheap petrol, and I said to him, keep this up, you'll be famous. You know, I went back about 2 or 3 weeks later and he looked at me, he said, now I'm famous, look at the cars. So he deserves to stay open. I totally support this. And I'm not a big fan of retrospective anything, but in this case, he's got my total support.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be supporting this today. I wasn't certain I was going to reading it, but going on the bus trip, the valuable bus trip as it often is, I was able to hear others' opinions and did change my mind. But I just would like to say that I think if it's incumbent upon us to believe the things that people represent to us. I don't believe anyone's putting pen to paper or, hands to the keyboard and some sort of spurious reason. I believe that if that is their experience, then we'll take it at face value that they do hear revving cars and that they are concerned about that. So perhaps there's a couple of things that Ravi could do. In the first instance, I suppose the fuel deliveries, which were coming at 11 o'clock at night, they've changed. So to assure residents that they won't start again with this increase to the operating hours, but also perhaps to put something that's visible to people who are pumping petrol, just to say this, this is clearly a built-up area, and we want to be able to continue to operate with the goodwill of our community. Please don't rev your engines after you've filled up your petrol tank. So, as I said, I think we have to be really careful to stand up here and say that someone's written a letter of representation, but I don't believe them. We weren't there, we don't know, they were, so I'm going to take it that it in fact happened.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Most of the other speakers have said it all. As a child, I lived about 1 kilometre away, and I remember when the service station was built. I think I was about 9 or 10, so it's probably close on 50 years old, so I'm sure the many residents who live there shouldn't be surprised there's a service station there. It has been there a long time, although it was shut for quite a number of years. Like the others, I'm not supportive of retrospective approvals. However, I think in this case, as he has been operating, and the previous operator for 4 or 5 years, in a 24-hour mode, I think we can at least look at the data now and understand the number of transactions that occur after hours, and they are less than 10 a night on average, and I think that doesn't suggest there'll be a huge increase in the traffic that would be there anyway for the residents who live in that area. And in fact, I think there are some benefits, in fact, from having 24-hour operation. One is the security cameras, but two is that an empty service station forecourt that isn't going to have any customers come into it is in fact a nice invitation for people to come and loiter and perhaps rev their engines, whether they're filling it up with fuel or not, because they know there'll be no customers coming in to disturb whatever they might be up to. So in fact, I think the residents might actually find that it is, you've got to be careful what you wish for sometimes, but I think having customers coming there probably helps keep the area a lot quieter than it might otherwise have been. So I'll be supporting it today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I do rise to reluctantly support this. I can understand from a resident's point of view, although, bearing in mind this change has occurred a few years ago, this is a formalisation of that change, and it's understandable the concerns being that there may be increased traffic over time. There may be other services that are offered over time. So I'd certainly encourage the operator, as I would for any operator of any business that has residents around them, whether it be light industrial, backing onto residential fences. These are the type of issues that regularly occur where one type of use isn't always congruous with people living in the immediate vicinity. And of course, this is a retrospective change, which is not ideal because we like to see things done as they're implemented, not afterwards. So that's, problematic as well. But in this case, certainly as Councillor Harris's memory affords us the case that it's been there a long time, and residents are certainly used to that. This change has been there for quite a few years. Residents would be used to that. I just encourage the operator to take whatever steps he can think of, and things like putting in security cameras, that can actually be of benefit to the residents. If he is to put some signage up to ask people to bear in mind that there are local people residing in the area, that would be a great thing. So any steps that can be taken like that would be certainly encouraged. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Just briefly, Mayor, thanks for the commentary made by everybody, and I take on board the comments made by Councillor Dawkins, and I hope I didn't come across that I wasn't disbelieving the people who'd made complaints, because I believe that that's real, and people do that. It's just the perspective of the area they live in. Sometimes it's something that's part of where you live. I guess that, I quite also endorse the commentary about any mitigation factors that the owner can take, being in a sensitive area, putting up some signage to ask people to respect people's privacy, or noise and so forth, is actually probably a very good positive thing. And just reminded me of Cambridge Street and me racing up there one night in my Corolla, my 1969 Corolla, and it leapt into flames. It was going that fast, no.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We move on to 9.2 for planning. And we have some speakers. Lixian Chen.
Hello. I have to just highlight that I only got notice of today's meeting yesterday, so I've done my best to prepare this little speech. So basically, thank you for having me here. My name is Lixian Chen. I'm the owner of 62 and 62A Galvin Street. I'm here to speak against the recommendation for the residential development of 60 Galvin Street in South Launceston. Based upon my representation and the material within the council agenda, I've raised the concern about the accuracy of the schedule study. I have also raised the concern about the legitimacy of relying upon the scheduling of a tree being equivalent to the scheduling of the development, which is a concrete building. A tree allows filter and partial sunlight. The development will permanently remove all sunlight for 62A Galvin Street in the winter. So the schedule plan will show something. You have to really read into detail to see the schedule plan. The development, where have I got to? The applicant and the planner incorrectly proposed that there will be 3 hours of sunlight remain after the build. In fact, that is daylight, not sunlight, that arrays from the rise of the sun. The proposed townhouse locates northeast of my property. The development will reduce direct sunlight from 5 hours to 0 hours between 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. in the winter. You have to look at the schedule plan properly to see that difference. This is a significant effect that cannot be minimized, and it is a permanent loss of amenity which cannot be ignored. Additionally, the proposed boundary wall will significantly reduce the direct sunlight to the private open space of 62 Galvin Street, which is the front house. The planner agrees, and I quote, "The proposed boundary wall will have an impact upon the amenity of the adjacent residents, particularly when using the deck area. The scheduling plan has successfully misled the planner to believe the scheduling of a tree is equivalent to the scheduling of a development again. Hence, consider the impact of the scheduling to be mitigated. The loss of the sunlight to this private open space is definite and significant. The loss of such amenity should not be ignored." So thank you very much for your time. I hope that when you look at the plan, look at the direction of the sun, because all I got is morning sun. All I got, and they are going to be blocked all over there. And when they say I will have the sunlight, it's actually by the time the sun already moved away. So I basically will have no sunlight, and I actually have sunlight.
Yep,
currently.
thank you. Your time is up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Brad Reeves.
Good afternoon all. My name is Brad Reeves of Townhouse 3-5 Egglington Street in South Launceston. I'm the director of the company that owns 60 Galvin Street and has made the application for the development we're discussing today. Although the property is owned in a corporate structure, should the DA be approved, we'll be building the new townhouse at the rear of the block to be our family home. My wife and I, along with our 18-month-old daughter, currently live in Hampton Street, a couple of blocks over, and we chose to purchase 60 Galvin Street as my wife is a teacher at East Launceston Primary, and the Galvin Street location enables her to walk to work. We also love the amenity that this city location gives, as we're able to walk to the Charles Street Strip and into the CBD with ease. We chose a two-storey design to provide a little more space than we currently have in Hampton Street for our growing family. The intent for this development is to construct modern, energy-efficient properties close to the CBD that allow people to walk or ride to work or town rather than drive. The development will utilise existing infrastructure, power, water, stormwater, sewer, which we believe is more responsible than expanding urban sprawl. This allows council rates, TasWater and TasNetworks fees to be spent on upgrading ageing infrastructure and assets as opposed to spending in new subdivisions. We're discussing the proposal today due to three representations. The primary issues raised are the proposed townhouse overshadowing a neighbouring property's garden to the north-east, that due to that orientation does not occur until post 3 p.m. on the 21st of June. Loss of privacy to the same property's garden from an eastern-facing stair landing window. I've proposed that I install obscure glazing to this window to prevent overlooking, and that's been added as a condition into the DA should it be approved. Overloading of the combined sewerage and stormwater system by increasing dwelling density, which isn't a planning issue and shouldn't be considered in assessing the proposal, noting that TasWater have granted consent to the proposal. And I do welcome TasWater to conduct any remedial works that they deem necessary during construction of the dwelling should the DA be approved. The final representation raised issues with overshadowing bulk and consistency within the area. The townhouse is within the building envelope prescribed within the inner residential zone. The height of the proposed townhouse is 6.4 metres, which is significantly lower than the undercover play area directly adjacent to the property. And the professional shadow diagrams completed show that the neighbours at 62A Galvin Street will have improved solar amenity due to the removal of that large tree in the rear of the yard.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Your time is up as well. So
thank you. Cheers.
Michael Benaki. Benaki.
Hello, councillors. My name is Michael Banaski. I'm the architect and director of Honed Architecture and Design, responsible for designing this multi-dwellings at 60 Galvin Street. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. All of the developments, neighbours will, like all developments, neighbours will raise questions and queries seeking explanations into why proposals like ours is possible. We acknowledge, respect and welcome all of these questions and queries and hope today we can satisfy and answer these. We are guided by the Launceston City Council planning scheme, to which most neighbours will not be aware of these guidelines and what is possible within these guidelines. In addressing the representations we received for this project, with the representation number 1 from Stephen Marissa, Brad's just highlighted that we are looking at modifying a window. With representation number 2 from Gabriel, this is a Council TasWater item. We are meeting all the council standards and requirements on site, but we do welcome them to access the site if they do need to upgrade any services. In regards to representation number 3, we understand and acknowledge their concerns. However, we do believe they have misread and misunderstood the Launceston planning scheme. The shadow diagrams are some of their queries. We do believe they are incorrect in their comments. We are professionals and our drawings are accurate. The shadow studies are based on one day of the year, the 21st of June, as per the Launceston City Council planning scheme. Not January, not March, not September, just one day of the year. We do comply to this standard. The building envelope, we do believe the representation has been misunderstood the planning scheme and we are within the building envelope. Not being consistent with the pattern of the surrounding area. In viewing the streets and the surrounding streets, we believe we are compliant to the performance criteria. The privacy of the school children. This has been raised by a couple of the representations, but the school was given an opportunity to make representation, which we believe they didn't, thus effectively agreeing and endorsing our application. The height and bulk will impact the neighbours with the sunlight and overshadowing. No, we do not believe so. We comply with the planning scheme. Our western neighbours' dining, kitchen and living spaces will still receive the 4 hours of sun on the 21st of June. We are to the east, so to the north they will get all day sun from northern aspects from lunchtime till the afternoons. In the end, our shadow diagrams are accurate and we do believe we comply with the planning scheme. So thank you for your time today and we kindly seek your endorsement. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the speakers I have. Are there any others? No? Thank you. So 9.2. Somebody happy to move? Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Soward. Wish to speak to Councillor Mackenzie?
Thanks, Mayor. Again, Again, I take the comments made by the representor and also the responses made by the proponent in regards to these matters. We're faced with these regularly where people are building in backyards, and they always will cause some consternation regarding on how somebody builds. And I guess, like all buildings, we prefer they were single story probably because they'll have less impact on their neighbouring properties. The reality of it is that under the planning scheme they have the ability to build within the building envelope which is set by the planning scheme, and this building to all intents and purposes fits into that category. The reality of it is there are issues of overshadowing on 62A, noting that that is a dwelling that's been built in the backyard of a property as well, so somebody's already done that, and I guess when that was built they should have taken to thinking that maybe somebody one day might build next door to them in the building next, in the yard next door. I know that in all the properties I've ever built, I've always looked sideways and behind me to find out what's actually going to potentially happen, even if it's not there. I do feel for the person who lives in 62A on the basis that, yes, I can see the difference in the amenity of having a tree versus a brick wall or a higher establishment that goes for longer and wider. So certainly the sunlight coming down onto the tree will overshadow, and it certainly is a large tree. It comes with its tenant issues associated with all the falling stuff that comes out of it, etc., etc. But it's a tall tree which does, particularly on the 21st of June, where the sun will rise from, is going to be banging straight into the back of that tree, which is where most of the sunlight will be taken out. My sense is that the overshadowing issues are certainly going to be extenuated by having a building wall through there. Is this enough for me to say no? I won't vote to approve this today? No, it's not. Unfortunately, we've come across two-storey buildings in the past where they've probably created worse overlooking and overshadowing than this particular building does. I think they've mitigated on the eastern side the overlooking aspect by putting glass in the windows to stop them from there, so I think they've sorted that. The stormwater issue I find curious on the basis that the hill slopes down this way, and if any water was going to run, it was going to run downhill, not uphill to where the representative came from. But having said that, Taswater have said that they're satisfied with that, and the detention requirements of water coming off buildings is pretty straightforward in relation to what anybody has to do to meet the planning scheme. So to me, the critical issue is are we happy with the overshadowing aspects of the building on the property on 62A, Galvin Street, and whilst I don't love it, I still think that largely there's an overshadowing problem that exists now with the tree, which won't be overly exacerbated by the building itself.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Councillor McKenzie, for his excellent summary of the key issues here. Just a couple of things I wanted to add, Mr Mayor. It's obviously beholden on anyone when they submitted an application that's to be considered by the council that it complies with the scheme, and I think Mr Banaski in his remarks talked about the fact that sometimes people, and quite fairly, don't sit down and read the scheme from cover to cover. It's not light reading. But when we look through what's before us today for our consideration, what is very, very clear, Mr Mayor, is the words consistent and complies pop up a lot, and where, for instance, various matters rely on performance criteria, when that's teased out, the particular application applies. So I would think with any application that comes before the council, it's very important for that person submitting the application to make sure they are indeed compliant with the scheme. Well, in reading through this, as I said, it quite clearly does that. In reading through the representations and the questions and the responses provided by our officers, like Councillor McKenzie, I do have some empathy around the shadowing, which is, again, obviously a very real issue for the representative who presented to us today about this particular situation. But as we read through the responses, Mr Mayor, I think the responses, tease those issues out. And the other one too, which I think was mentioned, was the Taswater issue. And as it mentions there, I think on page 47, Taswater has granted consent to the proposal advising that stormwater detention is required, and as it says, Mr Mayor, from our officers, it's a standard expectation for developments within the combined service area. So again, I think Councillor Mackenzie said, any type of development where something's being built in a backyard and so forth has its own challenges. The other one that was mentioned, I think, Mr Mayor, in the commentary from one of the representatives and in the written representations was around not being consistent with the area. And as I'm looking at the correct wording now, it says the proposal is not consistent with the pattern, style and density of adjacent lots. And as the officer said, Mr Mayor, which I think sums it up really well, the proposal may not be consistent with adjoining developments, but it is compatible with features of the surrounding area. And when you do walk through that area of South Launceston, Mr Mayor, you'll see lots of different constructions there. Not every home is the same. And often what happens, they are buildings like Councillor Mackenzie said, where someone has built something in a backyard, or we've seen something that's become old and tired and been renewed, renovated, refurbished. So I think that's captured well in that one. I'll be supporting it, Mr Mayor. As I said, and just concluding my remarks, I would like to think that when anyone puts something into the council like this, that it is important that it is compliant and consistent. Well, in reading through this application, those words come through very strongly. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Brees.
Thank you, Mayor. On visiting the site today and looking at the tree, whilst I think that it is sad that the tree will go, I would just like to acknowledge that the developer has put a setback on that side, which I think will be a great softening in the building for the people at 62A. I will be supporting it today. I think that it will be a great addition to the backyards of those houses. 62A is built in a backyard. I think it will actually improve their amenity to a certain degree. I think that area will continue to grow. It'll grow in the style of building that we're seeing proposed today, being so close to the school. There's sufficient parking, which is extremely important in that area because of the hospital. And I think that it will be consistent in the style of building too, as it meets the same size as the play area in the Calvert School over the back fence. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, a question? Yep.
Yes, a question. Thank you, Mayor. Being zoned in a residential, this is a question to our planning officer, Duncan. It's stated that in any street there should only be a certain amount of lots that can be treated in such a way, and that the count between Mulgrave Street and Wellington Street is the defining factor in counting how many lots have been developed in such a way, and that the count is something like about 8, and that the percentage of properties that could be developed being 40% would be more likely about 10. So my question is, does that mean that there's 2 more lots that could be developed like this in that street? And why was not, how do we decide what is the street that is measured? Because of course Galvin Street extends further than that. If that makes sense. I know it's an elongated question.
Yes, thank you for that. It's basically the scheme provision provides a percentage of multiple dwellings within the street frontage of that street within that zone. So whilst Galvin Street goes longer, the zone closer to Wellington Street isn't actually in the residential zone, and on the other side of Mulgrave Street, the zone changes again as well. So that's why there's a reduced number. And yes, you're correct. There's about 2 more houses or properties in that street that have the capacity to meet that acceptable solution.
1 minute while I ask you one more question in regards to the overshadowing diagrams, and I do trust the designer I mean, look, these have been, people have got them wrong before. It wouldn't be the first time, and I'm not saying that these are wrong. They seem to be perfectly accurate for that day being the winter solstice, the 21st or 22nd of June. But what's your understanding, without putting too much interpretation upon it, as to why someone would think that these are not accurate representations? Is it merely because the whole year is not represented, or are there other concerns?
All right, that's a fairly subjective question. People will read these things differently for different reasons. Yes, probably the fact that it only relates to one day in the year can give a bit of a false impression, perhaps. Also, because the hours of the drawings have moved, you know, in the morning the shadows are longer, and in the afternoon the shadows are longer, and in the middle of the day they're shorter. So there can appear to be some unrealistic movements in the shadow lengths. But, you know, I mean, I suppose if you sit there every day and put a stick in the ground to mark where the shadow goes on that particular day, you'll find, with all reasonable expectation, that it's quite close to the drawings that Mr Bernanke provided. And I did raise with him the concern raised by the representative, and he's double-checked and assured me that they are correct.
Thank you. No other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I will speak to this item, and I will rise to reluctantly support it. There's been many developments such as this that I have not supported, primarily for the reasons, the concerns that have been raised with this development. You know, primarily people's amenity being challenged, their lack of privacy, or the overshadowing of their property. In this case, I can see that the developer and the architect have made strong efforts to address that, and I think, you know, somewhat successfully. The opaque window that they will be putting in to reduce privacy issues. I think my biggest concern is the overshadowing, and I can understand that. It will be different in the middle of summer, but we're talking about not living areas. We're talking about a bedroom at 62A, I believe, Galvin Street, that would be affected closer to summer in terms of their morning sun. The balcony at the rear, you would presume, has probably benefited, will benefit from this development. The removal of the tree, that's going by the winter diagrams. So having said all that, yes, I will be supporting this, and I'm encouraged to see that developers are making more effort to be cognisant of the effect that they're having on their neighbours. As a previous speaker, in fact the mover of this motion, said, I think it would make all of our lives easier if this was a single-storey building. I would like to think that more, you know, as 62A was, you know, I remember that when that was built. I live in the area. I know what it's like around there, and when that was built, it was almost as if you couldn't see it from the road. It didn't have an impact on its surrounding neighbours, and, you know, that's always a desirable outcome. As a council, we do want inner city development and infill, as we call it. I don't think anyone disagrees with that, but I think we are grappling with the impact that double-storey buildings are having in these small areas where, when you look at it, the amount of land that's available in this particular case, it's marginal that the size of this, you know, property can afford the footprint of this building. It is certainly taking things to a point where it does have an effect on its surrounding neighbourhood. So that's problematic. I feel in this case there's very little to object upon. I certainly sympathise with the occupant of 62A Galvin Street, who I think will be most affected, not that other people might not be, but will be most affected by a change in their sunlight. But I don't believe it's enough for me to vote against this development application. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor McKenzie to close. I'll put the motion then. All those in favour? That's all councillors present. That is carried. Thank you. We now no longer sit as a planning authority. Mayor's announcements, just got a couple that I will mention. It was a pleasure on Wednesday the 16th, the 10th was actually, to attend the ABCDE Learning Site Community Workshop at Kings Meadows, and Councillor Harris was there. He spent the day there, only went for a short time. But it was great to see the enthusiasm and the number of people in the room and the variety of people from the not so young, but also some very young children from the school as well. And that was fantastic. So really looking forward to the results coming through from that. And then on Tuesday evening, along with Councillor Mackenzie and Priest, did attend the season launch for the Princess Theatre, and I'll leave the details to the Councillor Mackenzie, I'm sure, as a rep, but I just want to pass on the thanks that they shared on the night about how thankful they were for council support through the pandemic, through the last 18 months in particular, but they're very, very appreciative, so we pass that on to the councillors and to the CEO and to the team for working with them. So thank you. Now, council reports. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, I'll start with the Princess Theatre season launch on Tuesday night. It was fantastic to be there, and been a pretty tough 18 months in theatre, to say the least, but come back to bang. Yeah, Mamma Mia and a number of other productions that have been on in the last few weeks have really given a lot of heart and soul back into the arts community. So it's been fantastic. But I'd have to say I'm extremely proud of the Theatre North team in what they put together for Tuesday night, but what they've done moreover for the last 18 months. They've worked tirelessly to try and keep theatre alive in Launceston, even when the doors were closed. Dealing with pandemic issues of how we get people in and out of the theatre into the long-term future. But that hasn't been done, as you quite rightly say, without the support of Launceston City Council and without the support of the state government through Arts Tasmania. So there's been certainly support thrown our way, but the ingenuity of our team has come to the fore, and I think that the theatre offering for 2022 is absolutely spectacular. So I would recommend everybody goes and gets a book from the Princess Theatre about what's on next year, and go and join the Friends of Theatre North and enjoy all the benefits that come with that. I think something for $35 you get something like about $200 worth of value, so can't be better than that. So all I'd say, it was a fantastic launch the other night. It was terrific to see the Minister for Arts there, Minister Archer, and she was speaking glowingly of what theatre in northern Tasmania brings to this city and to Tasmania in general. So it was terrific to do that. Also enjoyed last night where we had the 40-year anniversary of the Launceston Musical Society, of which my wife's played a fairly significant part in over the last 20 years. So it was very nice to sort of catch up with some old friends and see some faces we haven't seen for a long period of time. But those sorts of organisations and institutions in our city are what make Launceston the potpourri of wonderful things that we are. So it was terrific to do that last night. And I'd also just like to note that it was terrific to go up to the Northern Suburbs Community Centre on Tuesday the 9th to sit and have a chat with Peter Kenyon, with people from the community, who is the founder of the ABCDE program, and then he rolled on, I think, to Kings Meadows the next day. I think what it showed was the importance, because Peter was there when the first one we did in Rochalee was set up a few years ago. But I think what it showed was the importance to come back and refresh and reinvigorate, and Peter is exceptionally good at doing that. He's got a great lexicon of stories to tell about where he's been and what other changes have happened in other places around the world. So it's fantastic to do that, and I could just feel the energy in the room with the people. We had probably 20 or 30 people in the room from within the community sitting down and talking to him, and I think I could just see the lift on it. And I think that's something we as a council need to take on board when we do these ABCDE things. We just need to make sure we keep going back and checking in with the community, giving that little bit of impetus to keep them moving through, because some of them need that continual reminder and reference point to go back to keep that level of enthusiasm, because it's all about helping oneself, and it's finding the assets in the community that you live in. And I think it's fantastic what Peter's done and brought to the city. We just need to make sure we keep that enthusiasm burning.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you. Yes, I'll just briefly touch on the ABCDE at Kings Meadows because I was there for 6 hours and participated as a nearby resident from Norwood. Interestingly, there were quite a few people who didn't live in Kings Meadows who were there participating because they did their business in Kings Meadows. Probably 60 odd people in the room, and as you said, the Kings Meadows High School students, mostly grade 7 and 8s, were a great energy and a great lot of ideas, and it will be interesting to see some of the things that will come out of this ABCDE. As far as the assets are concerned, Peter said he'd never seen so many assets in one community, and when you look at Kings Meadows, it certainly has got every sort of asset you could ever want. But I will leave you with the thought of one of the things that will come out of this. One of the things people felt was that they wanted to get to know their neighbour, perhaps better than they do at the moment, which is a problem not only of Kings Meadows but in fact of the, I guess, modern day life. And that they may come up with a slogan to put on a sticker on your rubbish bin that says, "Say g'day on bin day," to in fact talk to your neighbour, if only when you're putting your bin out. And I think that's an excellent idea that's been coming out so far. I'm really keen to see how that goes forward. And probably the other thing I will mention that hasn't been mentioned so far was I again attended the Places of Launceston Heritage SNAP Heritage Awards, the photographic awards, which I think hosted by Councillor Mackenzie and handed out by yourself, Mayor. I think it was an excellent evening, and to see the pictures of Launceston and the view of Launceston was fantastic. I really did enjoy that, and look forward to the next one. That'll do me.
Thank you. Any other Deputy Mayor?
Thanks, Mayor. Just briefly, 3 things that I'd like to reference. One is the Three River Theatre Society's production of Mice and Men, which was on at the Earl Arts Centre over the last week. We talk often about the large-scale productions, but in fact it's the mix of the small as well, and the straight drama and the serious offering that makes our theatre scene so dynamic, and it was certainly a wonderful production, well supported, sponsored by Council, and some very fine acting on display. The second thing I wanted to reference, and it's listed in your announcements as well, Mayor, and I know other councillors have been exposed to it, and that was the launch of the Rob Fairs Foundation, another inspirational opportunity for us to get behind the work of those people who are supporting young people who need a hand in our community, the opportunity to lift people up, to support them, to mentor them, to provide positivity in their life when they need it most. And we wish Rob Fairs and all the volunteers who are making up that organisation all the best as they embark on their journey to raise funds to support young people. And the third and final thing, Mayor, and lots has been said of it in the media, is the exciting announcement since our last council meeting that Launceston, broadly speaking, the region, has been announced as a city of gastronomy. Officially declared as one of 49 cities joining the global network. And I think in terms of the amount of time and resources that we as a council have contributed to the bid, it was not insignificant, and we recognise those staff members who worked so hard in preparing that bid, working with a number of volunteers from other councils, from other organisations, from Ferment Tas, and a passionate volunteer group in order that we submitted that bid. It was a project that was not in months, but indeed in years. And I think in terms of the return, the alignment with our branding, the alignment with our promotion, the alignment not only in the top end of things that are happening in food, but importantly at the bottom end, where it all begins, in terms of food security, in terms of food access, in terms of our work in the northern suburbs, that this really, as I've said during the life of the bid, this I think is a real game changer for our community and something that all of our neighbouring councils can get behind collaboratively to support, because I really believe and know people travel to anything that is UNESCO-ly regarded. And I think that the opportunity for tourists when the world opens up again to come and experience our city as one of 49 in the global network is really exciting. So we congratulate the members of the steering committee, but also we thank those members of our own staff who worked so hard on the bid.
Thank you. Any other reports? Councillor Preece.
Thank you, Mayor. I attended quite a few of the events spoken about at this table. I particularly enjoyed the 130th anniversary of the Launceston Arts Society, and I think that it highlights through the talk in that room, and also another event I also attended, the 40th anniversary of the Launceston Musical Society, the difficulties that these societies face in storing their equipment, their props, their artwork, etc. So it was great to hear from those groups that they've found some space to share those items. And also I'd just like to mention that at the Places of Launceston Heritage Snack Awards, I thought it was a fantastic event in its entirety, but also that there was a grade 2 student that won an award, and also through to an older person of some much greater maturity that was also a winner at that event. I thought it was great to run an event that all ages, all stages, and everybody was in the room. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no more, we'll move on to questions by councillors. Councillor Spencer.
I've only got one, Mayor, thank you. I had a letter from a electrical contractor that actually did the Christmas tree lighting for City Prom last year. This year, the council obviously must be taking this back over, and he's asking the reason why he didn't get a chance to price this. Also, he states that he did 20 to 30 hours of free work last year when it got vandalised, and he's disappointed why he wasn't given the opportunity this year. Is there any reason for that, Shane? Or?
We can take that on notice. We couldn't have that. It's mainly through City Prom, but we'll take that on notice.
It was through City Prom. Yeah.
It'll be on City Prom.
He is disappointed because it states here.
Yeah, so are others, but
extra time
Thank you.
spent there for nothing. So,
thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. A question possibly for the CEO, just in regards to the council's commitment to raising the Aboriginal flag on our buildings. Just an update as the status of that process as far as getting a flagpole, especially on Town Hall here, where it should be, and other locations.
CEO.
Thanks. I think the decision to erect a new flagpole was relating only to this building, as I recall, but it's been surprisingly challenging to work through the engineering of erecting the flagpole, cognizant of the fact we've got 3 up there existing at the moment, but we have worked through it. Because it's a heritage building, we've lodged a development application which is in the system now, and it hasn't been advertised, but it's a discretionary application, so it'll be advertised shortly. So we are, all things going well, expecting that we'll have it up by mid to late December. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, just follow up. I suppose I note with interest that other buildings with 2 or 3 flagpoles do also fly the Aboriginal flag. I'm thinking of, for example, the local fire brigade building, the MTT building, the hospital. So with 3 flagpoles, are we not able to fly it at the moment? Or is there a protocol that I'm not aware of?
General Manager Shane, you or CEO?
That's all right. At the moment, we've only got 2 flagpoles that are operational. The third one, and the reason we're getting the structural advice is it's actually not acceptable at the moment. So we're actually not flying any flags most days.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, we'll move on. 13.1 Audit Panel Meeting. Moved Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Walker. Thank you. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
Look, I think it's well outlined in there, Mayor. There's a fair bit of work goes on in those audit committee meetings, and we're dealing with all things that are all about continual improvement in the organisation, largely focused in the ones that are there today, and noting that we did get a clear audit report from the external auditors this year. So that's always an important thing when we're leading into an annual general meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is carried by all councillors present. We do move on to Tender Review Committee, 13.2. Move Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Spencer. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie? Councillor Spencer?
Yes, I'll talk about this one. Very disappointed with this one, getting awarded to a mainland company. I think it goes back to 6 or 7 people actually put expressions of interest into this, and they get asked all different questions, but the electrical trade is fully regulated and policed, and you've got to have full insurance to even work. And not many trades ask for that, but in our trade, you've got to have full insurance or you can't operate. You've got to have OH&S policies, and to work for council, they ask for this all the time. So it's very hard to have tender work as far as this. This same gentleman that talks about them all mentions this, that he quotes some work, and the council is the only one that asks for all this documentation, and he thinks it a little bit over the top. And I think this is why this last tender was awarded. It went to a mainland company that's going to employ local Devonport contractors, yes, but the profits for that go back to Victoria, which I do not like. They were the cheapest, I like, but technically I would prefer Tasmanian companies getting council's work. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
I will close. I mean, I think it's fair to understand that tender documents were put out in accordance with the policies designed by council in regards to asking for tenders out on Tenderlink. We might have got 6 or 7 expressions of interest in regards to those documents, but we only actually had 2 people who put a tender in. Councillors cannot be mind readers in regards to what other people might or might not have done. The reality of it is we had 2 tenders in which to assess against, and this one was assessed as being the most appropriate one. Like Councillor Spencer, I'd prefer that the reports gave us Tasmanian and hopefully Launceston people who are actually successful in the tenders. That's not always the case because A, they're not always the cheapest and not necessarily always got the right expertise that the council's looking for to do the many things that we do. If we've got issues in regard to our tender process, I think that's something we should have a look at, but that's not something that I think is evident in what we've received. People have chosen. I think there's a level of work that's going on in and around Launceston and Tasmania at the moment, which is probably making contractors reasonably rare anyway because they've got that much other work to do. So they may be choosing not to go into these things. So I think this has been appropriately managed in relation to the way the tenders have been put out. They've been done in accordance with policy, and we've made a decision based on the information that was provided back to us.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 13.3, Pedestrian and Bike Committee. Move Councillor Harris, seconded Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
I will, although I'm sure Councillor Mackenzie might recap this. The Pedestrian Bike Committee had its meeting. We discussed the bike count that happened in September, the cycling priorities in the network operation plan, but more perhaps importantly, it is coming to a close that the Pedestrian and Bike Committee will have its last meeting next Thursday before the new Transport Committee will take over the role in the new year. So it is something that I've been on this committee for the 3 years that I've been on council and really enjoyed it. It was interesting to have a discussion about some of the things that have been achieved over the period of time, but also I guess there's always a frustration at what hasn't yet been achieved, but many of those things are in fact in the network operations plan. So yes, it's a slight changing of the guard, and this will be the second last report from the Pedestrian and Bike Committee.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
I think I made comments at the last meeting just when we were bringing in the transport vision about the last one. I'll just raise, because it is the Pedestrian Bike Committee thing, is to really just acknowledge the work that's been done by the officers of the council in regards to it, and Nigel Coates has been a strength through the whole process in regards to it, not to mention a number of our community representatives who've contributed well to that. I'll probably leave final saying to our last Pedestrian and Bike Committee meeting when we have it, because that'll come back and be reported to council. But as I say, I think they've done a lot of good things. They're always frustrated by not having as much done as they'd like to do, but I don't know any committee that I've ever been involved in that's ever got everything that they wanted to do at exactly the time they wanted to do it. It's a process of time and resources to be managed through the system. So anyway, I think that what we discussed last time, we come up with a clever plan in relation to a couple of other things which we'd like to explore a little bit further. So that might be the full stop on the pedestrian and bike committee if we can get something up on in relation to a bike path somewhere.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris wish to close. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Council workshops 14.1. Move Deputy Mayor. Seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Deputy? Thank you. Councillor Harris. Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. We then move on to Finance Report 19.1. Move Councillor Mackenzie. Seconded Councillor Spencer. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I do, because I think it just shows the ongoing, we criticise for lots of different things, but I think the management of the way the council's operating is evident in relation to the response, to how we've performed in the first 3 months of the year. And I appreciate things that get timing-wise differently sometimes, and you get some things that are really good at the beginning of the year and not so good at the end of the year. So it's a 4-year program, but I think the highlights of what I can see through the process is that our revenue is increased, and that's probably on the back of more activity in relation to development and application, so a lot more fees coming through, which says there's a lot of activity going on in the community. We've got some rates adjustments which are purely on the basis of people who have done further development, and therefore our rates roll has increased because of development activities that have taken place already. And I guess that the fees that people are paying us to do further developments is only going to be good news down the track in relation to the rates that we'll receive. Cost control is pretty good in relation to our salary and wages are down on budget. But I think we just need to take a pause, and people say, well, why aren't we getting certain things done? And I do acknowledge the fact that we, like any other organisation at the moment, are actually struggling to make sure that we've got a workforce to deliver all the things that we can deliver. With the success of other business opportunities in the world at the moment, mainly in the construction industry and things like that, there's a lot of pressure on our workforce to maintain what we've got because there's pressure in salaries and wages and all sorts of different reasons why people might be moving to different places. So I certainly just want to say, whilst we might have saved money, it also does have an impact on the ability for us to deliver the programs that we actually want to deliver. So if the things are not going quite as fast as we'd like to, there may be some good reasons associated with that. I note in there, and one of the things that was interesting is our parking revenue was down, or parking fines are actually down, and I did ask that we actually go back and investigate. Now that we've got this Easy Park app, the likelihood of people can't find the coins to put in the thing, so I won't do it, and getting fined is probably a lot less because people are now just tapping their phones on the machine. So I think that we maybe need to rethink through what our revenue from fines are looking like in that area, because the reality of it is I think the world's changing, and the main reason people don't put money in parking is because they haven't got it in their pocket. So I think that's probably what's showing out in regards to that. But I think that, as you can see, the balance sheet remains strong. Our deficit's down. Again, it's the fact of the cycling back of what we thought the pandemic might deliver in relation to a slower pickup, where in most cases in Launceston we've actually we've come back from our pandemic low light a lot quicker than we thought we would. So the numbers are tracking very well at the moment. We've just got to maintain it for the rest of the year.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I think we should be investing more in civil contracting in the local council. We've got unemployment in Northern Tassie between 7 and 8%. So there's plenty of people there, if they get the chance, they can get jobs. So I think it could be up to the council to start having a little division for civil construction work, excavator, truck drivers, trench diggers and pipe layers. It's just not enough civil contractors out there at the moment, and it's going to get worse in time. So I think the council should make a lead role here and probably start a division with our own civil workers. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the budget? Financial report? No? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 20.1 Launceston Flood Authority, appointment of a new director. Someone happy to move that? Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I think the process has been done.
Councillor Harris? Anyone else wish to add? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We'll close the meeting. Thank you for your attendance.